honored to have three very distinguished speakers who will address the issue of immigration reform. First, New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg, who has been running the city since elected in 2001, just 2 months after the terrorist acts of 9/11. Mayor Bloomberg is co-chair of the Partnership for a New American Economy, which brings together more than 450 Republicans, Democratic, and independent mayors and business leaders who support immigration reforms that will help create jobs for Americans today. Next, Chicago's own Bill Daley, former U.S. Secretary of Commerce under President Clinton, and most recently Chief of Staff for President Obama. Bill is also a past chairman of the Economic Club, and we warmly welcome him back here today. Bill has been deeply involved in both private and public sectors and understands how important immigration reform is to the American economy. Finally, we're delighted to welcome to Chicago Andrea Mitchell, NBC News Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent and host of Andrea Mitchell Reports on MSNBC. Andrea will moderate today's discussion on the role of immigrants in the American economy, the need for sensible reforms that could create new American jobs, and the fractured political debate that has prevented immigration reform legislation from passing. Welcome all, and I'll turn it over to Andrea.
Thank you all. It's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you. We're thrilled. First of all, it's a tribute to Mayor Bloomberg and to Bill Daley that on August day, all of you came to talk about immigration reform and to hear what these two great political leaders have to say about one of the most troubling issues in our economy, and one that, according to Mike Bloomberg on Bloomberg News today, has a new column saying that the silence by both political candidates in this campaign, in truth, on this issue of immigration is really hurting the economy. Now, more than a year ago, Mr. Mayor, you called it national suicide to pursue our continuing immigration policies. Nothing has happened in this past year aside from one smaller fix along the way on the DREAM Act issue. Nothing has really happened to get past this gridlock. Where do we stand today in terms of national suicide?
Well, if a year ago I told you that the biggest issue facing the two candidates that defines the election is the economy, or was going to be the economy, and there was a cost-free way to make a major difference in the economy, and neither candidate would even talk about it, you would have said I was crazy. And that is in fact what's happening here. I know of no ways to help our economy as quickly and as cost-free as opening up our borders to people who will come here, create jobs, create businesses, help our universities. Immigration is what built the country. Immigration is what kept this country going for the last 235 years, and now we seem to have walked away from it. And both candidates had earlier in their careers been supportive of immigration, have, when they were running earlier, professed to be in favor of making changes, and yet nothing.
Now, I hope that all of you have access to Open for Business, the study that is the basis of today's campaign, because the mayor is going to be also going to Boston and speaking tonight on the subject, because the data in these reports show some really interesting things, Mr. Daley, Bill, Mr. Secretary. First of all, that new businesses are small businesses, which are drivers for job creation, are opened by immigrants compared to native-born Americans, 28% of new small businesses. And that 1 in 10 person working in this country is working for a company formed by someone who was born outside of the country.
Well, I think, let me first also welcome the mayor of the city, and those of us from Chicago, as New York, this city was built on immigrants. That's our heritage. And we who live here know that's a reality, that the people who come here, and many of them come here through great sacrifice and danger for many people, they come here with a spirit, and that is to be part of the American system, our history, entrepreneurship, work hard, the work ethic that people come with just to get here for many of them is an amazing testament to them. And you can see it drive through any neighborhood in Chicago, and you'll see that startup little business. It may be a laundromat, it may be a grocery store, it may be a dry cleaners, it may be a landscape business, whatever. But they have an energy that many of us may have lost, and they come here for the dream. The rest of the world still believes in the dream of America, and you can make it here, and they do make it. And without that spirit, our economy, which has struggled the last couple of years, would really be in much worse shape. So I think the mayor's energies, a year ago, the president had a session in the White House with a group of leaders. The mayor was there as one of the primary ones. There's no question the sort of political stuff that's going on in Washington right now doesn't seem to drive in any way, shape, or form towards an honest discussion of what the economy needs and then act on it. And the problem with immigration change is you really do need action by Congress. And both parties have got it at this stage.
If you want verification of what Bill said, just take a look around this world. Virtually every other country is encouraging people to come to their countries to start businesses and to create industries there. They are paying people to go to their countries. And when people vote with their feet for all of the problems we complain about in America, all of the things we're not doing right, still around this world, when people want to move so that they'll have a better life for themselves, their families, and have the freedoms that we come to take for granted, they vote with their feet and they come to America. So there's just no question what the public wants. The world wants to come here, and there's no question that we need them to come here, and for reasons that I don't know how you'd ever write a book about it. You couldn't make a movie, nobody'd believe it. We are sitting here and shooting ourselves in the foot.
And it's not just the issue of H-1B visas. That's part of it. But it is also the vitality, according to all the research, the vitality of people who come who are not educated, but are still starting businesses and creating jobs.
Well, nobody comes here to put their feet up and take welfare. That's just, may play well on the stump. But America is not a good place for that. There are plenty of other places where you can sleep in good weather and get food and not have to worry about it. America, and particularly cities like Chicago and New York, these are tough, competitive cities. And the only people that come here are people who want to give up everything, take risks, and work hard. And there's the old joke, they'd take 2 or 3 jobs if they could get them and work all of them. And the old American ethic is you'd come to the United States, you'd go to one of the port cities, you'd get here, and you'd get rid of every vestige of where you came from, your clothing, your language, your food, your religion. You'd try to be American. Today we hyphenate our ethnicity, but you want to get rid of it. And your dream was, God, if I work hard enough, my kids may get an education. Maybe even a few of them would go to college. And today, unfortunately, everybody wants it for me rather than for their kids. They want it now, and that we want to think we can get it by keeping others from getting it.
You talk about political gridlock. We're in the middle of a campaign. You've been in the middle and running campaigns, and you've run the White House, and you've dealt with Congress. What is the sticking point that has to be, unstuck?
I'm generally an optimist, so I do believe whether this will be a major issue in the campaign. Obviously, the economy is, but as the mayor says in this report, I would really also encourage you to go through this report. It's very specific. It's real changes that are simple, but there's data to show that there's an impact if these changes are made, as opposed to just sort of, pie in the sky sort of rhetoric. But I do believe the politics of, and this will sound very partisan, but I don't mean it to. Obviously, Democrats are very focused on immigration reform. Hispanic voters over the last 15 years or so, or less than that, pardon me, have been pretty Democratic. There's a greater conflict within the Republican Party as far as immigration overall. But I do believe after this election, had Republicans gotten a better vote of Hispanics last year in 10, they would have controlled the United States Senate. John McCain made that very strong case to the Republican caucus about a year ago. I believe that if they don't win the presidency, it'll be pretty obvious that they've got to do something, as George Bush did, to equalize the Hispanic vote. Therein may lie the opportunity, politically speaking, even though it was to be tough, for some compromise in a second term or in a first term, if there was of a Governor Romney, because I do believe that for their long-term purposes, take a state like Texas, it's very hard to envision Texas, if it goes Democratic at some point in the presidential election, going back based upon simple demographics, unless that spread changes amongst Hispanics, Democrat, Republican.
You keep in mind, we're always in an election year. The Rahm Emanuel has a 4-year term, Michael Bloomberg has a 4-year term, President of the United States has a 2-year term, because there's always those midterm elections. They get graded on that. That's win, lose, or draw. It influences what happens 2 years later. So they don't have 4 years to do things and see how it works out and take credit if it does, or give it time and adjust it. And that's, I've always thought for the president, it's more important than everything else. Do day one what you campaigned on. Because if you start postponing, every day you're one day closer to the next election, and eventually you get to the point where you're frozen, your political advisors don't let you take any risks.
Bill Daley, here's a question that came from the audience. Once we get through the elections, you just alluded to this, what's the optimal outcome to address this broken immigration system? The options could include a Romney presidency and a Republican-controlled Congress, obviously an Obama presidency and a Democratically controlled Congress, or some variation of divided
or no control
government.
by anybody.
Or no control.
Look, I think the first thing that has to be dealt with, obviously, is the long-term fiscal soundness of the country, with the tax cuts expiring and the sequester. So that's paramount, that has to be solved. I don't think it gets solved in a week or two. I think it's a multi-month process, even though they may have some general decision. I believe the next big issue, both politically, should be immigration, both because of the reasons I just said politically for Republicans, and for Democrats to get this thing behind them and make real progress. But these sort of changes that are specific here, that are focused on, as the mayor said, focused on things that can help our economy. You know, everybody uses the rhetoric of how do you help the economy, how do you create jobs, yada, 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 whether you're for big government or cutting government, whatever. But these are specific things that can be done. And along with then trying to deal with the undocumented people that are here, the 10 million or so, whether you believe they're going to get on the bus and go home on their own to Mexico or wherever, or whether they're going to be all put on a bus and taken there. The reality is neither of those are going to happen, and we're going to have to, as a country, do something. So I think if after long-term fiscal soundness is addressed, the biggest thing that either of these two gentlemen could do is immigration for the economy, not just for family reunification or whatever.
But as you wrote today in Bloomberg, the silence of both candidates on this issue is profound. How do you get them talking about
Well,
it?
in the end, there are certain things that are just not politically viable. And as you build up to a campaign, they are just not going to be addressed. Having said that, I've also said there's got to be something more important than getting reelected. I mean, if I said to the press, I care about my election more than I care about what's right for the people in New York City, they'd ride me out of town on a rail. And that is, in fact, what I think the two presidential candidates are saying. It is that on guns, there's 48,000 people that are going to get killed during the next presidential term. Neither one wants to talk about it. What they're going to do with the deficit ceiling and the sequestering and tax cuts, as Bill pointed out, they're going to kick the can down the road. That's what Congress is going to do. That's what Europe is going to do. Someday you really get to the point where you have to face some of these, but nobody's going to stand up and say to the AARP, we're going to really cut back your benefits, except maybe Paul Ryan has said that. And, you know, I don't know how that plays. Conventional wisdom is it's political suicide, but maybe that is the ways to break out. All I know is that we are going to have a split Congress, roughly equal, so who's ever president is going to have an enormous problem in getting anything through that's controversial. And, in fact, the president's job is to lead and to come up with ideas. And I don't see that from either candidate. And some people say, well, in an election year, you cannot have new programs. You cannot face these issues, whether it's the tax issue or all of the social welfare programs. And yet, go back to Bill Clinton. He wrote a book, Power to the People or something like that. he wrote a best-selling book in the middle of the campaign with real ideas. You can do this, and in fact,
Putting people first.
Putting people first, exactly right. And George W. Criticized Tom Delay. You know, I mean, he went after the right wing of. So you can do this. The president has the bully pulpit, but so does Mitt Romney. I don't think you should blame either one or only one. You blame them both. Neither one is willing to stand up. The president has a lot of sway on the Democratic side. Romney has a lot of sway on the Republican side. To think that the Republican convention is not going to nominate Mitt Romney at this point is ridiculous. He can say anything he wants and he's going to get the nomination. It's time for him to stand up, and it's time for the president to stand up and address this issue. And the president did do something with the DREAM Act, but he had campaigned on doing an awful lot more than that. And Romney, certainly given being governor of Massachusetts, another state with a lot of immigrants and that sort of thing, Romney's talked about the value, how important it is to help industry, and he certainly knows as a business guy this is what you got to do. And he's just unwilling to say anything either. And the only ways these guys are going to stand up and say something is if the public here demands it, or if one breaks out. And you saw with. If one guy breaks out, then the other one has to follow. And whether they'll just be desperate enough to say, I've got to stand up and run a risk and defy their political guys or not, I don't know.
Bill Daley, some would argue that Mitt Romney took a risk in choosing Paul Ryan because it put front and center some very tough issues, including Medicare. And yet you see the Democratic response is to sort of jump in the air with glee and arguably, try to demagogue it.
Wouldn't you think after all these years I'd know not to be on a forum with a mayor, you know? I mean, they tell it pretty much like it is. Look at, and not to get off on just the politics, because I do want to make a point on the immigration thing, and somewhat off of what the mayor said, and if I can. If you believe in this issue, and obviously you're here on an August day to listen to the mayor and to consider the issue. The business community's got to move this issue. Politicians aren't. You'll get what you get, what we've had. And unless you all get involved and say to these Democrat or Republican people you support constantly with money and your votes, you know what, this is important to us for our economy. You got to tell them that. The mayor can do that. Others can do it. We can have nice reports. But unless you all really say enough and do something, it's not going to change. So, but on the Ryan thing, look at it. It's a high risk, in my opinion. It's a high risk thing for him. Everybody likes it. Democrats like it. Republicans like it. I think it's probably about 3 weeks away from really deciding whether this was a brilliant choice that reframed the election, the debate, and raises the debate a bit, or does it end up being it's more about the Ryan budget than a Romney budget, which hadn't been really presented yet and filled in detail, as Ryan did do, no question about it. The mayor was right about the depth of Ryan's proposal a year ago, pardon me. It was real and it was specific, and you can hate it and think it's going to end the earth as we know it, or you can think this is the solution to all of our problems. But for a vice president and his ideas to trump a presidential campaign and make that the focus of it is a stretch, because usually they mean nothing after the first couple of days.
It would never happen on the Democratic side where a vice president, on particularly like social issues, would get ahead of the president. I'm sure that wouldn't happen in this country.
No, it never happens. Never. But this is a real plan that even the governor I saw on Sunday saying, well, I'll have my plan, the Romney plan. Well, when obviously they put that together, is it mirroring of the Ryan plan, or is it? And if there's differences, then they're going to try to drive. You all will try to drive a wedge right through.
Would I do that?
Yes, you would. And you would do it very effectively, if I may say.
Another question from the audience, Mr. Mayor. What actions would you like to see businesses in the U.S. take to move this immigration conversation forward?
Well,
As a follow-up to
I'm a
what
skeptic
Bill Daley was
about
just saying.
government after 10 and a half years. At the federal level in particular, you have people taking campaign contributions from industries that they regulate. It is about as big a conflict as you could possibly have. Since they do that, the business community might as well use their monies when they give them to get what they want. The trouble is the business community says, I'm only going to give you money if you do X, Y, Z. But even if you don't, they come back and give you the money anyways because their staffs, their lobbyists say, well, we've got this bill coming up and we want some support over here. Elected official, democracy actually works, but only if you enforce it. If you say, for example, I'm going to support you if you come out against the right for everybody to carry an AK-47, then they won't vote for AK-47s, except if they think they're going to get your money anyways, because the NRA is going to go the other direction and they don't change their mind. They've got the courage to stand up for what they believe in. And unfortunately, the rest of us try to balance things, look at some positions versus others, and say, well, I sort of like the guy or the woman anyways, and go ahead and do that. And government really is responsive, but only if you make sure that your vote is rock solid, the elected official understands what you stand for, and you're not going to get the vote if they don't. And on immigration, one of the real problems in moving the agenda along that Bill and I have is that both guys are saying nothing about immigration. So who do you move to? We've got to find some ways, if you want immigration to be on the agenda, to make them not be able to use the calculus, well, as long as the other guy doesn't do it, I don't have to do it. Don't run any risks.
And if you look at so far, early in the spring, when there were primaries, immigration was talked of in their primary season, and it was talked from a pretty extreme position that everyone gravitated for. Now that happens in primaries. It happens on the left too in Democratic primaries, as we've seen. But I think the president, obviously, and I speak from my experience last year with him. Yeah, we would love a comprehensive immigration reform bill. I think most Americans would like this to be dealt with, and the 10 million people that are here who live in the shadows and all the other things, figure out how to deal with this and move on. But since that is pretty unrealistic to expect a comprehensive plan, the president's tried to do things himself. But we struggled mightily to stretch to do things on our own at the White House and the administration. But it's very few and far between that you can do that make a real impact here. So the system has to move. And since the primaries, when it was used in the Republican primaries, there's been no discussion there. And it would be enlightening to see a real immigration reform plan. I think, my own personal opinion, I think President Bush, you've got to really admire him for putting that plan out when he did. I think there was a little bit of Democrats trying to improve it and make it better, as opposed to accepting it and moving on and changing it years later. And they all began to, we can make this better for us. The Democrats were saying they control the House, control the Senate. Or not the Senate, but we control the House. And we can make it better. And then Bush lost his popularity, the war, all of those things, and it was dead. And that was a hell of an
Immigration
opportunity.
means two things in this country. One, it means economics, that Bill and I are talking about, STEM visas and all of those H-1Bs and green cards, which are much more important than the H-1Bs because the H-1Bs are for short periods and not clear they're really very effective. It's economics on one side, and the other is what I call family reunification. And the Democrats are driven by a lot of their constituents wanting family reunification, bring in anybody who's related, whether they have skill sets that help the economy or not, but the decision would be made based on ethnicity of who's here already and whose family is here already, and the Republicans more so on the economic side. The sad thing is both sides agree that we need the economic side. They want to hold up the other side to get their side to get the other side, or vice versa. And you have this problem that it's what I call the Dick Lugar lesson. They are so polarized, they can't be seen coming to the middle to do what's right for the country. Lugar did exactly that. He's a conservative Republican. He lost his primary because he did that. And if you can't do that, how the heck are we ever going to get out of this?
And part of, if I could just, part of this is also, everybody's fighting over such a small percent of people. You've got X percent, 45% or whatever it is, of people who've made up their mind, we're voting Democratic or we're voting for the president. Got 45 over there, and this middle keeps shrinking. So everyone targets, because you can almost identify by name and their likes and their dislikes, and and they're zeroing in to where they're, when somebody shows up. Thank God none of us live in a state where, at least none of us up here, live in a state where there's a contest so that we can turn on television and watch it. But, basically, if somebody shows up at your door in some of these states, they know more about you than you probably know about yourself. This thing is so targeted, which is ridiculous.
Today, incidentally, the undocumented problem is being fixed. The number of undocumented in the country, every study shows, is going down. There are virtually no people coming across the border for a couple of reasons. One, we have put in a lot of security. Number two, it's easier just to get a visa, come here and overstay your visa. We don't check. And number three, we solved the immigration, the undocumented, by destroying our economy. And when they can't get jobs, people don't come. And there's a net outflow of undocumenteds in this country. So when Romney keeps talking about border security, I can't figure out what border he's talking about. Maybe it's the Canadian border, but it's certainly not the Mexican border where, there's almost nobody trying to come across anymore. He's talking about a problem that doesn't exist, and he's doing what both sides, and Obama the same thing, they're pandering to their constituents rather than trying to address an issue that is paramount in everybody's mind, and that's the economy and how you fix it.
The amount of taxpayers' dollars that's been put into this border, at the southern border, to stop this, wave that happened years ago is crazy. I mean, I remember there was a big fight. We have National Guardsmen that the federal government is paying for that basically are in towers like a mile away from the border with binoculars, and that's all they do. And I'm like, well, maybe we could hire some part-time security guys. Well, it will take us a year to train them.
Non-union part-time security guys? I don't think so.
No, we have to train them so that they're as trained as a custom border guard, which is a full-time. I said, all they do is stand there with binoculars when they see somebody. I don't know what they do, but they don't do it well, obviously. It was crazy, but that's the system we've got.
One of the questions from the audience is about E-Verify. Law requires companies to employ only those who work legally in the United States. What role do you think that E-Verify plays, and how should it be improved, if at all?
Well, if I ask you what's your Social Security number, and I check to make sure it's a legitimate Social Security number, and if the system works and nobody's already used your number or something or other, then I suppose it helps a little bit. It's hardly a solution to everything. If you want to make sure that nobody's scamming the system, whether it's getting benefits they're not entitled to, coming into the country and working here where they're not legally allowed to, you have to have biometrics. And biometrics are like teacher evaluations with numerics. You can't do it because it's real. And everything else is just a phony ways to say to the public. It's like what we did in 1986. Congress passed a very tough anti-immigration, illegal immigrant law. And then they made sure there was no funding to enforce it. And it's what Congress does all the time. They can turn to both their constituencies and say, see, I got you what you wanted, or see, I prevented what you didn't want to have happen from happening.
Bill Daley, you've seen a lot of campaigns. What's the effect of the amount of money and the amount of advertising that we see in this campaign? Is it bad for democracy? Does it matter? Should we worry about it?
Look, I think it is bad. I think it is, we've destroyed the party system, which is, we wanted to do in the 70s and 60s, 70s, and 80s. The new party now are those committees that will form out of this thing. If Citizens United has never changed, that you can walk in and spend an enormous amount of money. And when you focus it on 4 or 5 states or 8 states, the impact of that is truly enormous. And I do have a version to it. I think disclosure is most important. I don't mind if people are giving money, obviously, to whoever they give to, but I think there ought to be absolute full disclosure. Obviously, the mayor has the resources, did his campaigns, but you knew where the source of that money was. It was from him. I think these committees that you're able to hide behind, I think is really terrible. I think if people want to give a lot of money, that's great, but then stand up and let everybody know it and what your business interest, what your motivation.
Couldn't agree more. Disclosure is everything. Yeah. Having said that, I don't know whether it's effective or not. It may be that people tune out after so many ads. Every single day another ad, every single minute another ad, right. And so whether these people are wasting their money or not, but I think it is their right to spend their money as long as it's disclosed. The other thing you should worry about for the political system other than money is social media. Because social media really is changing the game. You can start to find out, as Bill pointed out before, with specificity, what people eat for breakfast and whether they like to, they'll buy a Egg McMuffin or they'll go down to some other chain or whatever. And there's an instant referendum on everything. And it's very difficult to govern in that kind of a world. Your political guys start to get more and more power, which is not good. There's an ability to communicate without any vetting. Before, if all of your ideas came from newspapers where there were editors and lawyers and experienced reporters, they weren't always accurate and right, but chances are you did get a fair and honest story. Today, with the blogosphere and everything else, you can say the stupidest things in the world and everybody all of a sudden believes it. It's like Stone giving you your history. I mean, this is craziness, but that's what happened. And I actually think that is more detrimental to our democracy than the money.
What are the barriers to a third-party run?
It's expensive. I mean, everybody says influence the dialogue. I didn't pay a lot to come here today, so it's much better than running for president, I'll tell you. The two-party system, Bill says the parties have been destroyed. Yeah, to some extent. But, 45% are going to vote for Romney and would vote for the Republican even if Trotsky were the Republican candidate. And 45% will vote for Obama, and they would vote Democratic even if Sarah Palin were the Democratic candidate. And so there's 10 or 15% in the middle that you can influence. There's just no room in our two-party system for a third party. I just don't believe that it is possible to get elected, and people say, well, Ross Perot had 22%, but that's one time, and nobody thought he had a chance. And in the end, the dynamic is you go into the polling booth and you say, I like that person in the middle, but not going to win, so I don't want to waste my vote, and I'll pick whichever is the least evil of the other two. And that's, I think, what describes what happens.
And I think our electoral college at the presidential level makes it impossible.
Yeah. That also.
You've got to get the majority in so many states and to get all the electoral votes. So I think that makes it impossible. You can get 20, 25, 23, but to get up into the numbers you need and win the states you need. Right now, the president comes to the table. It's kind of flipped from where it used to be for many years with a pretty solid electoral base. Romney gets a lot of states, but the Idahos, Montanas, South Dakotas, they have 3 or 4 electoral votes. California, New York, and Illinois gets the president starting off with, I think, 111 electoral votes. So that's a big base to start with.
It's also very difficult to get a message out. We're talking about the benefits of immigration, and we have statistics from reputable researchers and that sort of thing. But if you look at the ads, it's these sound bites that are, most of them, or many of them, which are totally misleading, if not out-and-out lies. And yet, that's what the experts think will influence the public. And it's very difficult to get a message out and to explain to people. And the newspapers think that they really can set the agenda and that you will follow who they recommend that you vote for. I don't see most of these editorials on the front page of the papers. They're buried in the back, and that tells you just how important they really think they are. That people don't read them. People read the front page, the headlines. They get an instinctive feeling. I like Romney or I like Obama. Why? I don't know. I just do. I like his name. He looks like he would be a good president. if you had a company and you hired a search firm and to get a CEO, and they sent you the resumes of an enormous number of mayors, governors, presidents, legislators at the local level, state level, and federal legislative level, you'd fire the firm. They don't have the qualifications to run, but to win, but to govern. But the qualifications to win and the skills are different than the qualifications and skills to govern. And every once in a while you get a mismatch, and lots of times you get neither. And every once in a while somebody comes through. And I think, Obama has done a lot of good things. I'm not knocking him. I think he can do and should have done a lot more. I think Governor Romney did a very good job in Massachusetts. Why he walked away from it, I don't know. But that's all history. The question is, what are they going to do going forward? And they've got to tell us, and that's why Bill and I are here. If you get elected, what are you going to do on these issues? And I think it's fair to say on virtually all of them, they literally duck any specificity.
There are very specific components on tax cuts that are out there, Bill. And, are we going to have a real debate? And what is the economic factor of that, of the uncertainty, the continuing uncertainty of what the business community is going to face?
There's no question there. The debate is already waging on both sides, cut or get a more balanced. They can't duck this much longer than early next year, if not in a lame duck session. So I'm an optimist only because I don't think they really can kick the can again. They may kick it for a brief period to actually get the details. I don't think you could do true tax reform in 3 weeks. I think you could do it in 3 or 4 months if you have a framework, albeit very difficult. But I think the debate is engaged. I mean, from the perspective of last year when I spent at the White House, American people very much want spending cuts. They really do. It's more of a comment, in my opinion, about their lack of faith that at the federal level, and it may apply in other levels, that the government can be effective to do what they think it ought to be doing. But whether or not you can have a comprehensive sort of discussion around tax reform other than the simplistic sort of way that we do it lately, I'm less optimistic that will happen. I think the one thing the president did very effectively last year, it's gotten kind of out of whack, at least the public perception of it, is this balanced approach that we do have to do serious cuts and we do need revenue, and you can get revenue through not only lowering rates, getting rid of a lot of deductions, you can still get revenue. You can't call it revenue because then the other side won't go for it. But a balanced approach, and most people understand balance and they are for it. They're not for the extremes. They really aren't. The extremes seem to drive our discussions. But I think the president did a good job last year. It's kind of fallen by the wayside with the campaign on a balanced approach. But nobody will lay out their specific sort of cuts. We could talk about more revenue much easier.
With the exception of Ryan.
Yeah.
Ryan, in all fairness, whether you like it or not, everybody wants somebody to be fiscally responsible. And when you say, that means raising revenue, raising taxes, and cutting mandates, those are the only two things that matter here. Ryan actually says cut.
Right.
And Simpson Bowles says cut and raise.
Well, when we almost did the deal with Boehner, we had real cuts.
Okay.
It never got out formally out because it was never finalized, and everybody was, I don't own it, you don't own it, so nobody owns it. But there were real substantial cuts had we been able to get to that deal. The question, as I said, Mr. Mayor, though, will be whether the Ryan plan is the Romney plan, or is there space between the two? Because the Ryan plan is about a year and a half old, I think.
Well, what Romney will do is say, that's not me, but wink, wink to the conservatives, the real conservatives, Ryan's there, don't worry about it. We will do these things, and he can maybe have it both ways. At least I'm sure that's what his strategy would try. If you take a look at personal income tax rates, our country's rates are low compared to the developed world. Our business taxes are high, and I still believe this. I've said it and written about it and spoken about it. If I were Barack Obama, I would stand up and say, I'm going to do something that's going to be unique and is going to put me in the history books forever as a real leader, and that is, I'd say I'm going to veto anything that tries to stop the end of the Bush-era tax cuts for everybody. not try to polarize rich versus poor. When you do that, number one, it's not America, and number two, the games that are played to get below or above the limit are so disruptive. But I'd raise taxes on everybody. That's the only way you're going to generate $4 trillion over the next 10 years to balance the budget. And then I would adopt the expense parts of Simpson Bowles, not because I think it's perfect, not because I agree with all of them, but at least it was done of two guys with a staff and some others that helped them to do something that's rational. Let everybody get hurt a little bit, but not destroy anything. Whereas normally, if you try tax reform or expense cuts in Congress, I'll do one for you if you do one for me. And it's all horse trading for our own constituencies. Simpson Bowles is not that. It may not be perfect, you may not like it all, but at least it's a plan that's come together. And if the president were to stand up and say that, and assuming he has the votes to sustain a veto, he could then turn to the Republicans and say, you didn't want any more revenues? Yeah, well, tough luck. I just took care of that. And you can't stop it. And now you want to work with me on tax cuts, on expense cuts. Simpson Bowles is a start. You want to tinker a little bit? I'm happy to do it. But I'm going to stand up and say I'm doing what's right for the country. And if it's good for my campaign, that's great. And if it isn't, at least I'll go down doing what's right for the country. I just think it's a bold thing. Now, he can argue that he's going to win anyways. And the chances are the incumbent generally does. But it's real time for leadership. And this is one time where he can do it without Congress because of the way the tax cuts are structured.
You know, Paul Ryan did vote against Simpson Bowles when he was a member of the commission. He said he didn't think that the health care piece went far enough.
Only one Republican senator, one Republican
But why didn't the president go farther in embracing it, Bill? And
let's get back to immigration. Seriously, I mean, this is a fun discussion. But we really do want to focus on it. I will answer this. I'm not going to duck it. I wasn't there. That's my answer.
All right.
if you had been there, it would have been different. When we talk about immigration and the importance of STEM and of bringing in, retaining the graduate students, the smart young people who are coming here, doesn't that also raise the questions about what are we going to do about our education system? You have tried, you've run up against all of the power blocks. Bill, you see it here in Chicago, what Rahm Emanuel is trying to do, what Richard is trying to do, but all of the obstacles and challenges. And from every study that I've read, our kids are doing really well until they hit 4th grade. And then they just start losing the competitive edge with the foreign counterparts. And why should we let Finland and Singapore and Shanghai keep beating us in international test scores?
Well, to just look at the scores, and you've got to look deeper than that. Obviously, you've got smaller countries, you've got less diversity in many countries that do much better, and we've got at the root of a lot of our problems in the historically disadvantaged, economically challenged neighborhoods. And all of the social problems there go into the expectation that 5 or 6 or 7 hours or a half hour longer in a school day is going to fundamentally totally change that is unrealistic. At the same time, and we have focused, and the mayor obviously has been there, my brother was, Mayor Emanuel is, on reform. And this has been going on now for 20 plus years, this reform thing, and charter schools and all the other options. But the root of our getting a stronger economy is a more educated workforce, and many people in this room have spent a lot of time on the issue, as has the mayor. To get that fundamental change and get that fundamental improvement is a battle royal, both politically with unions. They believe they're under siege. They're always the brunt of everybody's attack when they've only got these kids maybe 4 or 5 hours. All of the other things that go into it. But no doubt, we could talk about immigration, we could talk about STEM and all these other things, but until our kids get a better education, and we consistently give them a better education, it's going to be tough to see this economy.
We are falling behind the rest of the world. And for all the improvements that some cities like Chicago and New York have made, we continue to fall behind the needs of industry. And the worst thing of all is the only jewel left in our crown of educational venues or levels is higher education, and we are working as hard as we can to destroy that. You saw that in California, one of the great college systems they just devastated. But it's worse because when you give somebody a PhD, the best and the brightest, they come here because we have the best universities, and then we don't let them stay, so they go overseas and they join a university overseas, which is hurting us and helping them. And one of these days we're going to wake up and even that is going to be gone. And in the end, the only ways to do something about it is to have real accountability. We run our educational system, and it's true at the university level as well as in the public schools. We run it for the people who work in the industry as opposed to the people they're supposed to be serving, namely the children. And Bill points out, they will say, well, I only get the kids 5 hours a day and families are broken down, so yeah, okay, fine. You work in a newspaper business. People are stopping reading newspapers. Okay, suck it up and get on with it. That's what you have to deal with the world that you have, and education has to change. And you know, in America, or overseas, a lot of them, they take the top 20% of the kids and the top 20% of the schools. Here, that is just not true. And even with Teach for America, which is a phenomenal program and has given us great kids, most of those teachers are liberal arts majors that come out of it, and they've never taken math and science courses, or at least not a lot of them. And we all talk about how important math and science is, and yet we pay lip service on one side to something and then we don't do anything about it. But in the end, the battle is about evaluations, about results. And I've said 1,000 times, the president deserves enormous credit for hiring and supporting a guy from Chicago, Ernie Duncan. But having said that, the administration is walking away. We have this program where you only get money if your students improve to a certain level, and then we give you a waiver because you can't make it and everybody has a right to the money. And you can't have it both ways. We've got to stop and say, we are spending too much money in many senses because we keep funding things that don't work as opposed to moving monies to things that do and taking it away from things that don't. And that's one of the fundamental differences between government and business. In business, if you have a profit line that's not working, you take monies away and you move it over to the profit line that is working. In government, we move the monies in the other direction because when it's not working, the solution is always add more money. And in New York City, we spend something like $18,000 or $19,000 per kid. I don't know what it is in Chicago. $18,000 per kid, and the rest of the country on average something like $8,000. And the results aren't very much different. We've made enormous progress in New York City schools, but still falling behind the needs of industry and the needs and the competition of the rest of the world. And there's something like 3 million jobs is the number people use. I don't know if it's right. They're unfilled in this country. People say they can't find, skilled workers. We've got to do something about that.
And those 3 million jobs are not jobs that you need to got to be a nuclear scientist for. There are a lot more basic, what one would consider basic sort of jobs. There's some geographic dislocation, obviously, that has to happen to fill those, but they're everywhere, and they're not that sophisticated in level of need that one would think.
About a year ago, the Journal had a op-ed piece comparing the value of going to Harvard College and then into the workforce with joining the state of California Corrections Department. It wasn't even close. Let me tell you, go to California. Even if they're cutting back right now, you don't have to pay $50,000 a year for 4 years. You start making money right away. The vacations, the pensions, the work hours. It is so much better to work as a guard in a California prison than to take a Harvard education and go out and try to get a job.
But make sure you get the job as the guard.
Absolutely. We actually have the valedictorian of one of the Ivy League universities that joined our police department a couple of years ago, a woman, because jobs in the police department are good jobs. You can make a difference, the compensation is very good, the benefits are phenomenal, it's a chance, and the economy for other things is not good.
Is there a sort of precursor to getting reform on immigration that involves public education about how our economy needs this influx of workers and how it's not going to hurt you, you're not losing your job to this other person, that the overall level of economic activity is going to improve
The
by
Chicago
bringing people
Council
in?
on Global Affairs has done a task force and a very focused effort on immigration and a better understanding focused on the Midwest. And their research, which they're going to be putting out shortly, indicates a big shift in people's opinion. That they understand the need and the positives of immigration much more than the political system reflects in the rhetoric that you hear and the sort of clanging and noise that's made in that system. People get it at the local level. You know, in neighborhoods, the businesses that are there understand the importance of immigrants who come and open other businesses. And if you own a restaurant and somebody opens a dry cleaner that improves the neighborhood or whatever business, you may get more people at your diner or vice versa. So they get it at the local level. But whether we can get an honest sort of understanding beyond that, sort of in the big picture, the way our political system has become and the sort of way the noise around these elections happen between now and election day. The mayor's doing a Herculean effort. He is going from here to Boston to do an event with Rupert Murdoch. He's been at the forefront of this for a long time, trying to raise visibility and use the power of his office and his position to do that. But it really will take people like you forcing the politicians and the media to deal with this in a way that's a lot more real and granular than we generally have done.
I was asked one time, what do you do about cities that have hollowed out with industry leaving? And I don't know why I picked Detroit. It was on television. Somebody must have mentioned automobiles or something. And Detroit's had a very big problem with that, as we all know. And I said, the ways to solve Detroit's problem, the only ways I can think of to solve Detroit's problem is you give away the one thing that costs us nothing but everybody wants, and that's citizenship. You say to people, we'll have a program, you and your family can come here for 7 years, and we will assign you to a city, let's say Detroit. And the only requirements are, don't get arrested, you don't take any federal, state, or city money, so people can't say you're coming here for the welfare, and you've got to live in that city. Now, what are they going to do? They're going to buy those deserted houses, they're going to fix them up by hand, they're going to get a job, they're going to start a business, they're going to send their kids to school and demand the schools get better because they understand the value of education. If they have to drive from Detroit to California every morning, work 3 jobs and drive back that night, they'll do it because that's the way they're going to survive. And then after 7 years, if you're still there, you and your family get full citizenship. If not, you get thrown out of the country. That would do something for Detroit. And if anybody's got any better ideas for cities like that, I'd love to hear them, but I can't think of it. Now, the mayor of Detroit did not think it was a good idea. The mayor of Detroit says there's no jobs there, and I think he's 100% right. And I just don't see how you're going to get jobs there unless you do something like that. Now, the governor of Michigan thought it was a great idea, and he's got some programs to try to attract immigrants to Michigan, and he's right doing that. But really, this is the federal problem. You want people from overseas. And I still think that, and David Bing, the mayor of Detroit, I've met him a couple times. He's supposed to be a very good guy. I really don't know him that well, and very forward-thinking. And if there's anybody that's trying to fix a city, David Bing is. He's got a very tough road to hoe, and he knows it and all that sort of thing. Having said that, you got to come up with a solution to these cities' problems, and I don't know what else. Raise your hand if you got a better answer, but throwing more money, having another basketball program, raising salaries in the city for municipal workers, that's not going to get people to go to cities that are down on their luck. New York's on the other side, Chicago's on the other side. Our problem is maintaining it. These people and mayors like David Bing have a much tougher road to hoe than Rahm Emanuel and Mike Bloomberg, because they're starting out without a lot of the natural advantages of being very big and dominant in a region and having a lot of infrastructure and educated people and good schools and that sort of thing. And if you can help him, he needs help.
Well, in fact, there was an argument that one solution to part of the housing stock surplus is immigration, people who need houses.
If I could just add to this, the sort of idea that the mayor just threw out on the table, and many of us may say, oh, that's way over the top. If we don't start thinking out of the box about our problems and not say, well, the system won't do that, then we better change the system because this isn't really working, and this is the 21st century, and there's enormous challenges. So that idea may sound to conventional people as a crazy sort of idea and unrealistic, but as the mayor said, you got a better idea other than the traditional ones that may have worked 70 years ago? or 60 years ago in a very different world, fine. It ain't going to work in this century.
And let a whole other generation of kids
Yeah.
go without an education and businesses be destroyed.
It's crazy.
Well, for me, this has been such an antidote to the toxicity of the campaign. So I want to thank you for letting me be part of a really smart conversation. Thank you.
On behalf of the Economic Club of Chicago, I want to thank you, Mayor Bloomberg, Andrea Mitchell, Bill Daley. Thank you very much, and thanks for taking the time and coming to Chicago, Mayor and Andrea, for this very interesting and enlightening discussion. So thank you very much, and the meeting is adjourned.